Comic Book Savant 432. Welcome back to the Comic Book Savant podcast. I'm your host, James Harris. This episode was inspired by a video I happened to catch on YouTube by What Culture Comics, where they went around their office and had a conversation about what was a comic book character that you once hated, but now you've grown to like or actually love as a character. And I thought that was a really cool topic, and it was interesting seeing different people's takes on that question in their different offices, and was surprised and kind of related to some of the selections they picked. So I figured I would do a countdown episode where I would go over some of my list of characters I once hated, but now have grown to love. But before we get into that topic, as always, I'd like to give a shout out to my friends over at the Comic Podcast Network. You can find them over at comicspodcast.com. If you like this podcast and you're looking for more comic book related podcasts to check out, it is a great place to go to get started. It's basically a one-stop shop where you can literally find hundreds of different podcasts listed there that are all comic book related. They're separated out by single-person podcasts like myself, roundtable discussions, group, two-person podcasts. You can find them on particular publisher-specific, character-specific, teams. You name it, you can find it over at the Comics Podcast Network. So if you have a moment, stop by and check out the Comics Podcast Network over at comicspodcast.com. Also, since I'm doing shout-outs, I want to give a shout-out to my brother in arms, my brother from another mother, Heath Holland. He's killing it over at Serial at Midnight. You can find the website, serialatmidnight.com. You can find the channel over on YouTube at youtube.com/Serial Midnight. I'll have the links down in the episode. Definitely check him out. You know, we do Spinner Rack Bros. We do audio episodes here on the Comic Book Savant podcast, but we also do video episodes over on his channel as well. So definitely, if you haven't, you might have heard the episodes here, but you haven't seen us do our video episodes. We have about 5 or so of them, 4 or 5, I think, up over on his channel. So go check those out as well. Where we have a good time. If you enjoy the audio version, check out the video version. And we're here. We specify on comics. When we do Spinner Rack Bros, the video episodes, we focus on more of the content that he does over at Serial at Midnight. So we talk about bigger topics about just, entertainment, the impact of changes that are happening in the entertainment side, as far as when it comes to physical media over digital media, the movie theater experience, different things of that nature. So it's a different twist on what we do here, but it's still that same great back and forth conversation that me and Heath does. So if you have a moment, again, check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Serial Midnight. I'll have the links down below. And also check out his website, because he does written content as well, where he does music reviews, serial reviews, DVD reviews. So he covers everything when it comes to physical media. So check out the website as well. With all that being said, let's jump into this episode. So like I said, it was a video that I watched. It kind of inspired me to kind of, expand on what I saw in that particular video and go over some of the characters that I once hated or didn't like for some reason or another, but a certain story came up that kind of converted me. And the first one on my list, I would be remiss to say, was Hal Jordan. I've never been a huge fan of Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, and the comic books. Now, mind you, I grew up more in my teen years, especially. The only comics I really could get, I stayed in a real small rural town in North Carolina. I've talked about this before, where we had one gas station in the small town that I lived in, and they had a spinner rack, and they primarily were all Marvel comic books. So when I really got to my formative years of reading comics, from 10 to, let's say from 10 to around 16, that was like my only source, was this one spinner rack in a small town. As I got older, I could go to the town over and they had at least one kind of proper comic shop, if you can call it, or newsstand that sold comics. And then it kind of elevated a little bit, but it really took off once I went to college, and then I really were in a bigger cities in North Carolina where they had full-on comic shops, multiple comic shops that I could really dive in, and I kind of diversified and start reading more DC. Well, at the time when I started reading DC, I originally got pulled in from the Nightwing, Chuck Dixon Nightwing solo book that was out at the time, and I just started expanding, reading the different characters. My Green Lantern that I identified with was Kyle Rayner at the time, because he was the Green Lantern. Everything start building up when they start bringing Hal back. Kyle kind of got phased out. They did Rebirth and all that, and then Hal Jordan came back. And I liked Kyle. He was an artist. He related more to my sensibilities because I used to do a lot of drawing, and I fancied myself to one day want to be a comic book artist. So Kyle fitted my sensibilities and of what a Green Lantern was. And they always champion Hal, he's the best ever. He was always just glorified as this end all be all to any Green Lantern problem. Hal Jordan was the solution. Then I read Green Lantern Rebirth. And, I was doing the podcast at that time. This was early on in the early years of doing the podcast. Jeff Johnson came on the book. I remember Rebirth came out. I didn't pick up the single issues. I think I picked up the trades. And then I picked up the following trades of his initial run on Green Lantern. I probably picked up the first 4 or 5 trades, and they were just kind of on my shelf. And just one weekend, I just really wanted to read. So I'm like, I'm going to finally read Rebirth. I read it. And I'm just like, oh, well, Hal maybe is not that bad as I thought. So I read it over that weekend. I think it was a holiday weekend, so it was a long extended 3-day weekend. I read every Green Lantern hardcover trade I had in my house at that point, and it was 5 or 6 of this run. And then I started picking up the monthly book and I kept reading Green Lantern until Jeff Johns left the book, and I even stayed on even after he left. And what is his name? Oh gosh, I can't. I'm totally escaping what the writer is. The writer that took over after Jeff Johns finally left. But anyway, I even start reading into his run as well, and I dug it. And I really started. I fell in love. I don't know. I really like Hal Jordan. Let me say that. I'm not gonna say I would marry him or nothing like that. We can go steady though. We can go steady. I put a ring on it. Like a friend ring, but not like a wedding ring. So the 2 stories that really converted me on that character, I would have to say, is Green Lantern Rebirth, which was written by Jeff Johns and artwork was done by Ethan Van Sciver. And then the following trade that launched into the main Green Lantern series was written by Jeff Johns and the artwork was done by Ethan Van Sciver and also Carlos Pacheco. That first trade was No Fear, if I remember correctly. So those 2 books I can recommend that, if you kind of been on the fence about Hal and you want to really get to the root of this character and find out how really interesting he is, those 2 books would be the first thing that I would tip you to see if that might convert the way you think about the character. Next on my countdown list would be Luke Cage. And, I talked about this some months ago when I talked about Black History Month and how I felt disconnected and didn't feel like I knew enough about African American characters in just comic books, and how I was kind of disappointed in myself about I didn't know all the histories, and it wasn't till I had a Black Panther movie that I really knew Black Panther's history. And Luke Cage was another character. Growing up, I had a lot of comics handed down from I had 2 cousins that were 2 main cousins that were heavy in the comics that would hand down their comics to me, and I would read a ton of stuff. And I just thought, I was a kid. I grew up in 75. Well, I was born in 75, but I really was a kid of the 80s. So that whole blaxploitation era of movies and things like that, I was really too young to really understand it and appreciate it. I'm growing up in a kid in the early 80s, hip hop, rap coming. Luke Cage was still like that throwback to the 70s of a time even though I was born in it, I didn't really understand. So like seeing the bright yellow, the tiara, the butterfly collar and stuff like that, I just visually always turned me off to Luke Cage and felt like it was like someone other than my stereotype of what they thought an African-American superhero would be. And I had a problem with it. I had a big problem with it. And it just always turned me off to the character that I never even would give the character a second look. Or if he was on a book, I wouldn't even read it. Like, it would just turn me off to it. I think the first time I picked up a book, and I never finished reading the series, and I'm trying to go back and correct that now because I've grown to love this character so much because of comics and even because of the Netflix series, is Luke Cage. And I think the first book was in the 90s, and it was a Heroes for Hire book. John Ostrander, which is one of my favorite writers, was writing the book. And I tried some of it, and that was the first time I really was like, I'm going to check this dude out. And they kind of they kind of amped it up, but it was still like he still had a tiara, but they kind of tried to hip up his design. And, I checked it out, but I didn't read the whole series. And now I'm always curious about it because I started, never finished it. And it was when I first started exploring the character. But when I really got into the character and really started digging Luke Cage was Brian Michael Bendis' New Avengers run. Now, it's too many books on that run to name, and he had a really epic run. Brian Michael Bendis did New Avengers, and I think it spun out to Mighty Avengers, and it was a bunch of different Avengers books, but the core book was New Avengers, and Luke Cage was a pivotal member of that team. Jessica Jones, because of their relationship, she was brought in. It made me just really appreciate the character. He really did a great job of modernizing and updating that character to make him relevant in today's society. And it blew my mind that it wasn't an African-American writer that did it. It was done by a Caucasian writer, and he felt so relevant. Me being a black man reading this character was very relatable, and I identified with that character. And that just goes to show, people talk a lot of junk about Brian Michael Bendis sometimes, but what he has done as a writer for minorities in comics, not being a minority, you got to give him props. Because this is a black man reading a comic not written by a black man about a black character that I related to what he put on the paper from that experience like he was one. That's phenomenal. And like sometimes people's like, about his writing style and all this different kind of stuff about, that he draws stuff out for the trade and all that kind of stuff. A good writer is a good writer. And that dude has written Miles Morales, Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, like so many great characters that either he created or he took like out of the graveyard and revived and revitalized these characters. But I digress. But like his whole New Avengers run, just what he did with Luke Cage and taking him as a, like a D-level hero and pulling him into prominence where he's like a leader and a voice for the New Avengers. Man, he did so much with that character. So like if you on the fence about Luke Cage and what kind of character he is and how dope he is, read the New Avengers run. Just start picking up those New Avengers trades from Brian Michael Bendis. You will find out why that character got a TV show. It was because of this run right here and what this writer did with this character that made all that possible. Straight up. Next for me is you probably like, I'm not putting these in any order, and for this countdown it's just straight up like just characters and listing them. But a lot of people know I'm not the biggest Superman fan. Not even a little bit. Nah, I can't deny it. He's just how Superman is normally written. He is such a Boy Scout. It's like he's undefeatable. He's unbeatable. And it's so annoying because you can't really do any real character development with the character unless you have a great concept and you build upon it. And some of the stories that, the one story that really turned the key for me and start seeing Superman as a more viable character. And I would read runs on Superman here and there, but he was just never, I'm more of a Batman than a Superman. And that's funny with the contrast when I think about me and Heath. Heath is a Superman purist, and I'm a Batman purist. So we're like, I'm the Dark Knight, and he is Superman, the golden son of Jor-El. So it's so funny when it comes to that. But the one book that really changed my view on Clark Kent, for Superman and Clark Kent as a character, would be Superman for All Seasons. And that is the Tim Sale and Jeff Loeb collaboration. It's just such a good story, well done. Really made him human, and you saw Jor-El, Kal-El, and Clark Kent. You see him as a real person. You see that he has feelings and how he grew up and how it shaped him in the man that he has become as Superman and taking on that mantle. And it's just so well constructed and put together that I just love that story. It just made me start viewing Superman as a character totally differently. The next story that I really love, that I want to revisit at some point and do a updated review of it. I think I reviewed it years and years and years ago. With Superman Up in a Way. This was, I don't know, after one of the big crossovers, but it was when they did the 1 year later where they jumped ahead. Maybe it was after when the 52 happened. I want to say they jumped ahead a year and they were going back telling the stories. And this was written by Jeff Johns, Kurt Busiek. Artwork was done by Terry Dodson, Renato Gutierrez, and Pete Woods. And it was just a great story where during that year they jumped forward. Superman Clark Kent was not Superman. He didn't have his powers or anything, and he just had time to be an investigative reporter like he is. And it was just a really great story coming into how, his relationship with Lois had changed, just him being impactful and being just as much of a hero as a reporter as he was as Superman, and then him coming back to getting his powers and becoming Superman again. It's a really well-told story that, again, made me appreciate Clark outside of just being Superman in a suit, and that he is a more than Superman. I feel like, and this is the thing that I drew, and I remember I said this in the review, and this is really how I feel. I feel that when it comes to Batman and Bruce, it's no such thing as Bruce Wayne. Batman is Bruce. Bruce is a mask for Batman. When it comes to Clark, Superman is a mask for Clark. That's who he really is at his core. When you break down Superman as a character, he is Clark Kent or Kal-El. That is who he is. The mask is Superman. It's just him at his core. It's just he has to put on the outfit to be able to do what he does to save people. But at his core, he's still that same man. Bruce Wayne and Batman are two totally separate people, and that he has to put on this facade of Bruce Wayne to function in society. Boom. Drop the microphone. That's all I got for you on that. Next character is Aquaman. Arthur Curry. I was never a huge fan of Aquaman. I thought this was corny as F. And again, another book, a DC character. It's funny that a lot of these characters, like DC characters that are on my list, you think I really hate DC, and that's not really the fact. I swear I really do. Aquaman by Jeff Johns Omnibus. It is the new 52 run. I think he did like the first 25 or so issues. Just pick that up. If you never liked Aquaman before, if you didn't like the movie, whatever, pick up this omnibus, read those first like 25 issues he did. It'll change your perspective on Aquaman and Arthur Curry. Jeff Johns does his magic again with Ivan Rez and just works magic. It just shows you how just cool and interesting a character Arthur Curry is, aka Aquaman. The book is transformative. New 52, like I said, the first 25 or maybe 27 issues, maybe in it. I don't have the breakdown right here in front of me, but if you just do a search, and I'll put links also in this episode to some of these books that I'm recommending to you. If you guys don't already have them, you want to find them, I'll put links. I'll put affiliate links in. Boom, boom. Help the channel. Clicky, click. I appreciate you. Love you a long time. Do that. But that is really worth a good read. It's like really just looking at. He does a great job of building up characters, like tearing them down from the foundation and then building them back up, making them like really cool characters. Next on my list is Booster Gold. Again, it seems like a theme. I'm going heavy on DC. But Booster Gold I always thought was really a jokey, kind of throwaway character. It was just what it was. Just how he was presented in the times I read him. Or I would see him and stuff. He just visually, he just wasn't really interesting until I read 52, the original 52, not the new 52, the new 52, all that stuff. 52, the original weekly series that came out. I think it's collected now. You can get it in an omnibus, you can get it in a 2-trade format, or you can get it in a 4-trade format. 52, written by Jeff Johns, Greg Rucka, Grant Morrison, and Mark Waid, with a ton of different artists on it. If you read that, they really build him up, and he's one of the central characters that the story focuses on over that 52-week period that the book covers. And it really, you start seeing where he came from in the future, how he came in how his suit was made, his powers, his motivation, how they were maybe unsavory at first, and over time and being exposed to the great heroes of the past, when he comes back in time, how he starts becoming a hero in his own right, and the journey he takes in 52 really elevates him to a whole new status that he didn't have before that point. And as you go through that journey with him, I started appreciating him and seeing him as a fully fleshed character and a viable hero, and a cool hero in his own way. So I definitely recommend 52. If you haven't read 52, that is a book that is a must read. If you never had a chance to read it when it was that part, and partake in that part of history at the time it was coming out. Again, that was like a great time, because like I started podcasting in late 2006. And like so many of these trends, that these transformative things that happen in comics, I got to experience firsthand as I was learning my way in podcasting. I experienced these events real time, like 52, and it was just had never been done before. They've tried to do it multiple times. They tried to replicate it multiple times, but nothing was ever more successful than the original 52. They did a lot of other bi-weekly, yearly series after that. They did Countdown. No, I didn't come up with the name from that. I came up with it on my own. It's just a coincidence that it was called Countdown as well. But you know what I'm saying. They did other little things to try to replicate the success because it was so successful. And I don't think financially wise and fan reception wise, any of them were ever as successful as 52 was. And it was just lightning in a bottle. And it feels awesome that I experienced it firsthand. I do want to go back, and I might do a retrospective on 52 and reread the whole thing and do like a mega breakdown on it. If you guys would like to see something like that, let me know. Send me an email, hit me up on social media, hit me up if you're in the Facebook group, do all that. Just hit me up. Let me know if you think that'll be a cool thing, and if you guys want it, I will do it for you guys. Next character on the list is Cable. Giving some love to Marvel now. Cable was not my favorite character when he first debuted in the comics back in the 80s, 90s, 80s, late 80s, early 90s. It was too much. It was Rob Liefeld at his best / worst. I don't know. I just was not feeling Cable at all. I think the one story for me that turned Cable around for me as a character that I could tolerate and dig a little bit, if handled correctly, is X-Men Operation Zero Tolerance. I picked this up because I want to do a retrospective on this. I just haven't gotten around to reading it because it was a massive X-Men event. And I want to go back and revisit it and do a review on it because it's one of my favorite X-Men events next to the Mutant Massacre. But this one really spotlighted Cable in a special way and really gave me a better understanding of him and as a character. And he had been around long enough where, so much mystery and collusion and convolutedness when it came to a lot of different things about cable, and he had been around long enough where he had been firmly established, and it could be explained, his motivations, how he moved, those type of things a lot better. And I started appreciating the character as seeing him in this event. So it took me down a path where I really start understanding the character and liking the character, and made it a readable character for me. Next on my list is Cyclops. I just didn't like him. Thought he was a prick, basically, in comics, bro. And it carried over in the movies, but I thought he was dealt dirt in the movies because it felt like he always had potential as a character, and I thought you saw way more shades and saw him as a more three-dimensional character in comics than you ever did in the movies. And I hope something with Marvel finally having control, when they finally reboot X-Men, that they get the right person to play Cyclops and really explore him as a character. Because I think after I opened myself up to him, and the one story, and it was a more recent story, he's always been around, and I've been an X-Men fan, and I've always kind of, he's like the little brother you don't like, that you can just punch in the side of the head, or like, kick push down or something like that. I just always felt a certain way. Always felt this certain tension, even as a reader, reading Cyclops in a book. I tolerated him because I liked the X-Men, but I really didn't like him. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't going to have his back like that. And then Schism came out. X-Men Schism came out, I don't know how many years ago now. It's like the past 5 or 6 years. Time flies so much now, especially when I'm about to hit 14-year anniversary podcasting. I don't know when any of this stuff came out anymore if I don't look it up. I just remember I've read it all. Well, stuff I talk about at some point I've read at some point. But Schism, Jason Aaron, and Karen Gillian were the two main writers. They had, I think, various artists on each issue of the series. And it was set up to be Magneto, in a way, Magneto versus Xavier, the updated version, where Cyclops is Magneto in this situation and Wolverine is more the Xavier side. And I liked the tonal shift in the Cyclops character at this time, and where he kind of took a more extremist point of view. And I liked the direction, and they eventually even they made him an all-out villain at kind of one point because his extreme tactics that he kind of used. And I liked that because it was a reasoning for it. He was like the ultimate Boy Scout. He had always tried to do things Xavier's way, and he had took so much personal loss, and he was fed up. And it was because of his experiences. He was always out there in the front line, spearheading, being that good Boy Scout, that good leader, that good, errand boy. And he was like, enough is enough. What we're doing is not working. Now I'm going to do stuff my way, and I'm not taking any prisoners because mutants are dying, and we shouldn't. And I dug that, and I wish they had, and I read this story, and I read some of the stuff after, and I liked it, and it was a definitive line in the sand, and I wish they stuck with it. And now I know they kind of, in the comics, I've read some stuff where they've kind of, or read articles or heard different things where like they kind of brought him back, and they kind of try to soften that stance, and maybe he's a good guy again, but he's been a bad guy for a while, so they're playing with that line. I liked him better as a bad guy. Because and I feel like when I talk about villains, especially when I talk about Magneto, and I've said this numerous times, or even someone like Dr. Doom, in their own eyes, they're not villains. They feel like they are right in what they're doing, and they can justify it because they've had horrible things happen to them to shape them in that way, to have their perspective to be the way it is. So I could dig that. And I understood his motivations because I've read years of him always trying to do the right thing or what people thought were the right thing, and it always blow up in his face. So I understood his motivations for going maybe a little bit extreme, and it was to do the great personal loss. How many different friends can he bury? How many wives he can lose and bury? And all these kind of personal tragedies that he can keep having happen to him over and over again till anyone's going to crack under that much pressure over time. I don't care who you are and how ultimate or good, pure you're going to be. So you're going to hit a breaking point at some point. And he was still trying to overall help the mutant race and the human race, but just with a different set of means and tactics. And I can't hate him for that. So I made me see another side of him to make him a more viable, likable kind of character for me, where I really couldn't stand before. Next up, I have Kazar. I thought Kazar was like a Tarzan ripoff. I'm just going to say it straight up. Like, you thought it too. Come on. It ain't just me. Come on. Look at me. I see you. Look at me. You thought he was corny too. Come on. Kazar, K-A-Z-A-R. Come on. Then the 90s came, early 2000s came, and then they did a little series on Kazar, thinking it lasted like 12, 13 issues, something like that. It didn't last long. I was a funny story about this. I wanted to read this so bad, and I couldn't find it at the time. My friend, longtime listener, former podcaster, he doesn't podcast much anymore, great artist, Ryan King. Look him up. He's a great artist. And I talked about this book and wanting to read it and trying to find the trades and all that kind of stuff. I couldn't find it. It was Kazar by Mark Waid and Andy Kubert. Now it's been recollected and you can get it in the whole series in like 2 volumes. And I picked them up digitally because I read everything digitally now, but I still actually have the comics. Ryan had the whole run. And he mailed them to me. He was like, I'm tired of hearing you talk about the books. You can't find them. I think I got them in my mom's, attic. I'm going to find those books. He finds those books. He mails them to me. And I never got a chance to read them. And it's one of the few, I got rid of all of the comics in my collection pretty much, and trades and all that on my physical comics. But that's one collection. I still have them packed away in a box because I just thought it was so heartfelt that he legit went to his mom's attic, found the books, mailed them to me so I could finally read them. And I still haven't read them yet. I'm working on that. I'm going to get to it. Though he probably sent this stuff about a decade ago now. I still have them. I cherish them just because he was cool enough to find them and send them to me. I started reading. I think I've read like half of it. I had started reading the issues, but I just never finished. It was like I was moving around a lot at the time when he sent them. So I got like halfway through the series. So I bought the whole thing digitally so I can just reread it, and I want to so I can finish it. So I want to do that at some point. But when they did a whole thing of like Tarzan with the Legend of Greystoke, where kind of like they take him, take Kazar from the Savage Land, you drop him in New York, and he's doing crazy stuff like he's fighting crime in the city, and he's going up against Thanos, like crazy stuff. And the artwork by Andy Kubert is just amazing. Mark Waid's writings, I always just liked Mark Waid as a writer, and it's just really good. It's really good stuff. And so seeing that and putting him outside of the Savage Land, and he really was defined by the artistic styling that Andy Kubert put on him. Really turned me onto the character. They don't do much with they do stuff with Kazar here and there, but it really made me like the character. Where before I wasn't a huge fan of the character. Next, I have Two-Face. I was never too much a big fan of Two-Face until they did, what was it? Cataclysm. Yeah. I gotta say the events right. I think Cataclysm came first, where it was a huge earthquake in Gotham. And then from Cataclysm, it was like No Man's Land. And there was like it was Cataclysm. Then it was like something. It was like Aftershock or something like that. So it was something else. Then it led into No Man's Land, and they really did some really neat stories, and with a lot of different bad characters during that time. Gotham was totally closed off from the rest of the country, and they were left to fend for themselves. Bruce stayed and was still fighting crime during the day, during the night. Different villains kind of emerged, and Gotham was sectioned off. It was just really great. It's a massive undertaking if you've never read it all, because you have to read it in the proper order. Cataclysm, you got to read that, and that's a collection in itself. And if you want to read all of No Man's Land, it is a massive collection because it went on for a year in the comics. So it's multiple volumes of it. But then when, I spoke about earlier, with Booster Gold when they did the one, not done with Superman, but the Up and Away story. This was during that same period where they did, they jumped forward and Batman had kind of went away. Harvey had kind of got his faculties back together. He actually had plastic surgery and he, got the damaged part of his face fixed, and he was Harvey, and he was actually kind of serving as Batman in Gotham during this period that Batman needed to get away. And the story is called Batman Two-Face Face to Face. It was written by James Robinson. The artwork was by Andy Clark, Wayne Future, Leonard Kirk, and Don Kramer. Really good story. If you want to check out a really good Two-Face story, and Harvey and the relationship he has with Batman, aka Bruce, really great story. One of the better Two-Face stories that I think I've come across and read. Worth checking out. Really kind of changed my point of view on how dynamic the character of Two-Face can be in the right writer's hands. He can be so much. And the last character I have on my list, and like I said, this countdown was in no particular order. I just wrote down the different characters, and I wanted to give a reference point on if you don't like these same characters that I don't like, here's some stories that you could potentially read that could change your perspective on it. Might not. Hopefully, it did for me. So I thought it was good to give a point of reference on, and if you wouldn't come back with the question, well, what changed? This changed. So I'm letting you know. It's called context and point of reference. That's what I try to do for you here at Comic Book Savant. I try to do better. So last character on my countdown list of comic book characters I once hated is Taskmaster. I thought Taskmaster was the corniest looking concept for a villain I ever saw. And then they were like, his powers is he can look at you and he can mimic what you do by some supersonic reflex thingy-majigging. And I was like, what? He got a Skeletor face. He got like he looked like he was like a rejected Masters of the Universe figure from the early 80s. Like he had a Skeletor head. He had what they call it? Bandolier going across, looking like he was like He-Man or Man-at-Arms, and then he had like some swashbuckler boots. He looked like the most confused character ever in comics. I swear to God, he did. So, what changed for me when it came to Taskmaster was Fred Van Lente, bless his heart, and artist Jeff Paulo. They did a limited series called Taskmaster Unthinkable. And they revolutionized the character, modernized the character so much. And it's like one of my favorite, just like fun reads ever. And they like totally modernize and make this character so dope. And I don't want to ruin it because I want you to read it. Taskmaster Unthinkable, pick it up. But it gives a really cool backstory to his power set and how it really interacts. And they add a personal element to him. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but they just give him a really good backstory. And he's not as much as a villain as you think, but he makes some villain-like choices. But they really innovate the character in a very interesting way and make his skill set like really slick and like really interesting, because how it was always explained, like he had to over-explain it and be like, yeah, that's why he can hang with everybody, because he can mimic their moves, and like how it all worked and how it tied into him as a person. And it's really cool in this series what they do. And he's picked up and been used a lot more in like things like video games and more series, like more recently after this and around this time, that he's been made more viable character and more of like a kind of threatening character, which is kind of cool because they made him cool again. They made him interesting. So that's what I got for this countdown list. I thought this would be something fun, something different. I try to think about or get inspiration from different places to do countdown lists to make you guys think and wonder yourself, what are some of the comic book characters that you once hated that you read something in particular and it turned it around for you, how you view that character. Maybe at some point I might do an opposite on comic book characters I once loved. That might be the sequel episode I might do down the road. I just got a new episode idea. Told you guys it's organic like that. Bam. I was really just joking when I said that. And then once I said it and I chuckled, I was like, yo, that's a good episode idea. Might need to do that. I'm going to write that down now. It's not going to be coming soon, but it's going to be coming. Countdown, comic book characters I once loved. Because I do have a list, if I really think about it, on characters I really used to love that I don't really love that way anymore. So we're gonna do that. I think that's a good idea. So if you have some suggestions on comic book characters you once loved, now you hate, email me, comicbooksavant@gmail.com, or go to comicbooksavant.com. Go to the contact page. You can email me directly from the page and let me know, and I will include your recommendations or your suggestions in that episode when I do it, because it's going to be coming, not immediately, because that would be too soon. We're going to let this breathe for a little bit, then we're going to come back to it. So, as always, check me out on YouTube, youtube.com/comicbooksavant. The website, like I said, comicbooksavant.com. We got the merch store popping now. We got a couple, two t-shirt designs. Now we got some other merch like stickers, coffee mugs. We got a few things. If you checked out some of the newer YouTube videos, I got some of the shirts. I had a white and a black one, so I showed off the Comic Book Savant logo that you see on the iTunes art. Check that out. The merch store. I'll have the links down below as well. Follow me on social media on Twitter, Instagram at Comic Book Savant. The Facebook group, I have a link to that as well. Come over and join the Facebook group. We interact with one another. We get to know one another. And we talk comics. And we get to know one another as we're growing the Savant Society daily. So come over and join us and become a part of it. And we just have fun. And it's really dope to get to know a lot of you better. And if you like the content that I create and you want to help support the show, I have a Patreon as well. It's patreon.com/comicbooksavant. I have different tiers with different bonuses linked to them. So you have different levels of support depending on how much you want to support the show and unlock certain things. So you might want to check that out as well. But that's all I really have for you guys for this episode. Thought this was going to be something fun, light. Hopefully I made you laugh a little bit. And maybe gave you a different perspective on some of these characters, or piqued your interest to pick up some of this stuff that I'm talking about, to read it, to see if it might turn the page for you when it comes to those particular characters. You see what I did there? Turn the page, comic book pages, I don't know what's wrong with me today. Okay, I'm going to let it go. But that's all I have for you guys for this episode. I'm your host, James Harris. This is the Comic Book Savant Podcast. Until we meet again, you guys have a good week. Stay safe, and I will talk to you guys soon. Until then, take care.